someone thought of that ride, right? And you think about how crazy that ride is and how that came to reality, and understanding the piece that rendering had, right?
Yeah.
With linking NVIDIA's custom GPUs and such. And that's the type of stuff that really, really excites me, that I'm like, oh my God, throw me in, where we make the impossible possible.
Welcome back to another episode of Savepoint Stories, the podcast where I, Kurosh, sit down with guests to talk about and explore the games that they have strong connections with. And sometimes I get a chance to have a bonus episode like this one, where we get to talk to some of the people that work in the industry that make those save points and give us those moments. And so without further ado, I'd like to get into today's conversation and introduce our guest today. We shared the stage at San Diego Comic-Con last year in 2024. Please welcome and thank you for joining me today, Megan Friedenberg. Thank you, Megan, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Great to be back. Great to be on stage with you again once more.
Yeah, the virtual stage, as
Always
it were.
A pleasure.
For those that aren't as familiar with you, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and letting the folks know who you are?
Sure thing. So I'm currently a rendering engineer at Imagineering. That's Walt Disney Imagineering, right? Where I work both with R&D and Tech Studio. Tech Studio kind of being like our core department. I've been here since January. Prior to then, I spent about a year and a half at Sony. And then right before then, I spent about 10 months at Disney doing real-time animation in Unreal Engine.
Wow, okay. Oh, sorry, and what?
Oh, okay, just like rendering graphics engine, that's me.
So yeah, I kind of wanted to, you're saying rendering engineer, graphics engineer. Can you, for the outsider that isn't familiar in the industry, like what does that translate to? Like what is someone who would do what you're doing be doing? Like what does that look like?
Sure thing. So for me, right, I'm a software developer, right? So you use a game engine to make games, right? Mm-hmm. And in a game engine, there's both like editor and there's runtime, right? When you're playing the game, you're seeing runtime. And then when someone is making a game, they're in editor, where they could be editing levels, they're panning or flying through a scene or the level they're creating, right? And within that game engine, you're going to have a ton of tools, right? The fact that you could click on something and be able to move it around, or you could draw like a grid across the world, those are all engine features or engine tools, you might say, right? Okay. So as a rendering graphics engineer, I'm dealing with both graphics that you would see runtime playing the game of like, oh, that's neat how that light bounced, or if you're a game designer and you're making the game, the type of tools I was describing is I also create those tools as well.
Oh, okay. So the framework as well as what you're seeing in real time for the player. Okay. And so does that something, you gave like a few different places you've worked at, and I'm sure now in total, how long have you been working in the industry?
So let's think about this. I've been in working with like game engines of this type, if we include my snippet of animation time as well, since that was like all in Unreal Engine. We were just repurposing a game engine for film instead since May 2022, and now it's May 2025, so 3 years now. Wow.
Happy anniversary.
Why thank you. Living the dream.
Yeah. And so what was it, something that you always knew you wanted to get into in the gaming space, or what led you to it, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so there are really two things for me, right? That's like, so my two earliest memories of, I started playing a GameCube at 5 years old. Super Smash Bros. Melee was like my first game, because a GameCube is actually the only gaming console that has ever been sold at Costco. And my dad saw it and was like, my family is gonna love this. And we did, And right? So then I also remember at 5 years old, I watched a lot of Pixar films, right, as every kid does growing up, but I saw, like, my first Pixar short film was Knick Knack.
Oh, okay, I remember that one.
Right, with the snow globe, and for me, I, like, at 5 years old, I couldn't believe that, like, we as humans produced it, that we could have pixels and triangles draw on the screen, and the way the snowman is, like, moving, and I was, like, looking at the animation, I was like, this is crazy awesome, right? So I've always had those kind of interests, right? Always grew up as a gamer. Grew up playing MMOs, every single Nintendo game you can find,
Yeah.
I know you see the mini games in the back. Those are just some of them, and
Just a few.
Just a few. So my brother was always a gamer and grew up as a gaming YouTuber. So I was always like being little sister, looking over his shoulder, seeing what he was doing, playing the games he was playing, right? And then I was very lucky and I got to go to the college of my dreams, USC. I was not in their games program. I was computer science adjacent, right? Okay. So I still got to take all of the games classes I wanted, but I still got to just, take like computer architecture, operating systems. So always like an interest in computers. And then I took my first elective. I took gameplay programming, and like weekly homeworks, right, where you would make a game every single week. And you started off on Pong, then you went to Frogger, right? Then you went to Pac-Man, and then you built your way up to 3D, ultimately remaking the first like 3 or 4 levels of Mirror's Edge, if you remember that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and that's where you like started talking about cross products, or like how do you wall run, and then like I would do all the extra credit on the homeworks, because I had so much fun. And there's so many hours going by that I was like, this is the best, right? So then promptly after this, I had like my first really, really big college internship, which you are never going to believe this, but I actually had a banking internship.
Really? Oh, interesting. Okay.
And that's
a hard pivot.
I know. And then it was that internship though, where I realized I wanted to be in games really, really badly. It took me working at a bank to be like, this isn't my dream. Mm-hmm. And then I was prepared to make anything happen after that. And I mean, the following summer, I joined Disney and took a hard pivot turn. And that was where I took every single games class they would allow me to at USC after that and get credit for it. Mm-hmm. I ended up having to petition for several courses to be included as part of my like computer science degree.
Yeah. They let it go through those petitions, most of them, or
they ended up for all of them. I made very strong cases and went back and forth on a couple. I guess an example is instead of taking like the internet networking class, I took the Unreal multiplayer networking class where you make a multiplayer UE5 game that can release on Steam. I mean, I was still learning all the same like networking concepts. I actually just made a game with it, right?
Yeah, you're like applying it in a specific direction as opposed to broadly learning it, I'm assuming. Yeah.
So, I mean, right after I got my Disney internship, and it was everything I ever wanted. I mean, I just never looked back.
Wow. Okay, so you just went in like that's so. There's so much to unpack there. Like, okay, so when you were taking those courses, was it something that was very much I've just talking to a few other folks like that you've met, like Steve and Brandy and a few others, gaming curriculums in schools. You're mentioning here it was the electives and you had to petition for that. Like, how was there a community around it? Were classes empty or sparse, or was there were you building like seeing others like-minded like yourself? Like, what was that space like? I'm kind of just curious.
Yeah, the USC Games program is a very large community in space. Ultimately, though, I didn't end up taking a couple classes that I think would have included me in that core community. For example, AGP, the Advanced Game Development class, where over the course of an entire year, you build a game with like 20 people. I did not take AGP because I wasn't going to get credit for it. Gotcha. So I mean, for me, it was I had to take every single games engineering class offered, right? So it was like the multiplayer Unreal one I mentioned, it was gameplay programming, and then the follow-up to gameplay programming was actually game engine programming. Okay. And there's a game engine undergrad and grad class. The undergrad class is taught by Matthew Whiting. So he was the first lead engine programmer at Insomniac and worked on Spyro. And that was basically my mentor in college.
Oh, okay.
I took his game engine class, and you know what? It was supposed to be like a 45-person class. It's known as one of the hardest undergrad classes for computer science at USC because the whole class is you make an engine. Like, it's not, you say engine class, it's really like a graphics class. Okay. Right? And then you like have to implement your own animation programming as well, right? And I mean, by the time after the first midterm happened, we had 8 people in the class. We started at 20. It's just everyone dropped,
Yeah, it's like Hunger Games.
Yeah, it was so hard, it was like my homework is due Sunday midnight, so I started at Sunday morning like a perfect student,
As one
And
does.
as one does, I'd start right at 8 a.m. and then it would take me to like 10 p.m.
Wow.
Right? Like, so I mean, like I had a community, but it was really small. Like the amount of people trying to do be like engine programmers or graphics engineers, there's really not that many. I really wish there were more. I will always advocate for more because ultimately, yes, it's hard, but I think it's a great time and you end up making something really visually beautiful. Or I mean, it's just one of those, like, for me it's the snow globe moment of like knick-knack of like, I made this.
Yeah.
I see that triangle moving on the screen and I did that.
Yeah, the moment of creation, you as we often are always like consumers in so many things that you're in that other seat now and creating something. So yeah, I in my, like, in these spaces, there's like moments that I have and I'm like, man, it must be profound when you have something that you're creating that's like you're seeing people, it's on the shelves, it's on maybe on the shelf behind you, that you're like, hey, I worked on that.
Yeah.
This is so. But okay, so when you're talking about the community was more sparse at the time, did you start meeting your peers or folks like-minded like yourselves in work or in spaces later? Like, can you, like, what did that look like?
Sure thing. So definitely both, right? I mean, when you start getting to like game engine programming and multiplayer Unreal, those are in the best way possible. Like, I love these classes, I love what I did, but those are the trenches.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like, I'd imagine a lot of this work is so, from what you've described so far, is like, it feels like you are bunkered down, getting into the nitty-gritty of it. Like, how involved is it, like, interdisciplinary? Is it cross-functioning? Is it like, are you working with a lot of different people? Is it a very social type of like technical path?
So the games program is designed to be, but the thing was that I wasn't in the games program. I was in computer science. So if you took GP, right, then you would have been interacting with game designers, right, technical artists, so much more. Because I was just straight shot engineering, where I did, I want to preface and say, like, I did Bachelor's of Science Computer Science, and I did Master's of Science Computer Science, right? Okay. So then with no AGP, right, and not really any of these major game design classes, that, like, I really only interacted with other engineers. And then when I got to industry, that was when it was, oh, okay, you being hired as an engineer on this team, pretty much like 95% of the people you're going to interact with are all artists and designers, right?
Yeah, and that was something you talked about on stage at Comic-Con, of like, there are design choices or artistic choices being made, and then they have to you and them have to work together to find a way to translate that into actuality of, like, how do I take that concept of a cape or something like akin to that and turn it into, this is a functioning element of the game. So in that way, you're very involved?
Very much so, but not so much from the standpoint of like I don't make creative decisions. I may be, sometimes I'm asked for creative input, right? I mean, Insomniac fundamentally has a culture that good ideas come from anywhere. I mean, Imagineering is the same way. If you pitch an idea that you have, that is how ideas and projects get created, right? But I mean, at the end of the day, my workload is, okay, they thought of this feature, you need to be the person that actually goes and implements it, right? Like,
right.
At San Diego Comic-Con, I talked about that both business and art decided they wanted capes in Spider-Man. Did they ask the engineers? No. Were the engineers told it was cape time? Yes. And that's right. And that's, your workload's a lot more like that, and I feel like school did help me prepare for that in a way, because you would get an assignment and it's like, oh, okay, you're implementing IK animation this week on your game engine. I mean, art decided there needs to be animation, and that's kind of what the real world is like, right?
Yeah, very much so. How much, though, do you get a chance to, like, in the different environments you've worked at now in the industry, and you mentioned Insomniac as one example of, like, good ideas come from everywhere. Have you been in a position ever where your input was taken into account, or you've seen input from someone in your role being taken into account of, hey, that design could work, but it could work better, or we should avoid this flaw, or I don't know, something like that?
Yeah, very much so. My first Disney animation job, so we were making a holiday special for the show Big City Greens, right? And it was, I think it's like season 3, episode 20 or something. Have you seen Big City Greens? And like,
I haven't. Could you give a brief overview of what it is?
Sure thing. So it's a 2D cartoon, and I mean the main character is Cricket and his family, right?
Okay.
And it's, if you kind of like imagine a crossover between The Simpsons and Beverly Hillbillies, right?
Okay.
The two shows, right? But I mean, make it very kid friendly and ultimately about like family and friends, right? That's kind of what Big City Greens is, right? So in their holiday special, it's based on it's in 3D because Cricket gets like a VR headset for Christmas, right? But it's snowing outside, but if he wears his VR headset, he can still hang out with his friends on Christmas.
Okay.
So in this Christmas special where they're in this 3D generated world land game, right? You know, I was in a design review where does the candy cane cannon look enough like a real candy cane cannon? And I was looking at like 3 different designs and mock-ups, right? Because in this virtual world, it's all Christmas themed, and he gets the candy cane cannon to go fight the snowmen, you know, and then it was stuff of like what I don't know, what color should this tree be, you know? Like it's like, was I a part of the initial concepting phase? Not so much, but then the review of like, okay, here are these 3 different, do we like the way this is going? Which of these 3 options do we like? I've been in those.
Okay.
Right.
And how much, I guess, is it often or not often where those earlier stages of concept and early, design and stuff, are they privy to what what is the parameters of what you're creating? Like whether it be the engine or the graphical, restrictions or restraints? Is there a high level understanding of that, or do you see a disconnect there with some of that?
That is a great question.
Because I see that at least. There's oftentimes you people wonder like, you hear in the news for gaming, things don't really come together until the end, or the delay happens, or this happens. And in my industry, which is engineering in a different route, but it's very much they're not talking to each other. There's not at least a understanding downstream of what's going on. That's where my thought comes from, that of like, is that something you see like industry philosophy, or do you see varying perspectives on that or philosophies on how that works?
I definitely see varying perspectives and philosophies, right? I mean, I think an artist doesn't need to know how to implement like the different 3D collisions. How do I know if this triangle is touching another triangle? That's definitely my job, right? But then, I mean, you're going to have best practices, right? I mean, you can't go crazy on the custom shaders. You're going to create too many PSOs, right? And I have seen when I worked at Sony, I am thankful I got to work with a lot of artists and designers that were very more so engineering minded. Like they knew pretty much the consequences if they went crazy on the art, right? And like better practices of, it's not just make sure my model has as few polygons as possible and have a clean submitted model out of Maya. It was more than that. It was, I can't go crazy on the custom shaders because of PSOs, right? Okay.
What are PSOs, if you don't mind me asking?
Sure. So a pipeline state object, right? It's pretty much different shader variations, right? So if I have like light sand and dark sand, even though they both fundamentally look like sand, those are now 2 different PSOs. So you can either load PSOs in at runtime, or you have to pre-compile them. So if you're launching a UE game for the first time, or you're launching, like the engine for the first time, and it says compiling shaders 9,800 something, it is compiling the PSO objects. Gotcha. Is what it's doing, right? So if I decide I want 20 different versions of sand, you may have like 20 to 40 now different PSOs depending on how many things you changed. If I even just changed the alpha of the sand, that is now a new PSO. Gotcha.
Okay, so right. I feel like that's some of that high level like understanding that can really change things downstream. We could either have one that we intuitively use in smart ways, or we could have created multitudes of like you said, PSOs or other things like that same philosophy.
Right. So I would say the biggest disconnect, though, to circle back to your original question, of what I see is there is a massive difference between editor time and runtime, right? Runtime, ultimately, that is what the user is going to play the game and see, and that's really significant to profile and see how your performance is measuring, right? Because the performance you're going to measure on editor, when I'm just like playing my game in editor, right? Or for our people listening that use Unreal, you know, there's play and viewport, right? But the stats you're going to read on that is not going to be what people are going to see playing the game. That's standalone, right? And I often see that disconnect there.
Okay. Is there things that you think could better be done to mitigate that? Is that just more of a, hey, we should have a conversation, or do you think there's a large... Okay.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, it's I've worked with artists that were aware of the PSO problem, right? And I mean, being aware of editor versus runtime and seeing how your changes reflect in both, that we should just have a conversation about it.
And so that kind of leads me towards, I guess, more of an industry question. If I talked to Steve about this, of like what he sees from a recruiter, about in like team philosophies and team organizations, and there's very few, like I don't know if you see much on the YouTube side, but there's I think Devolver and NoClip kind of have been showcasing or normalizing transparency of like, hey, this is how this company culture is, this is what they do, and this is how this one does, and this is how this one. Do you think that is helping in any way, or are there more things that could be done to help like better understand what works for different teams to make it work more cohesively?
I'll admit and say I haven't been too much on that side of the YouTube. I mean, for me, it's more of reading about graphics blogs.
Okay, yeah.
And reading about the latest advancements and seeing, like, you know, how people are implementing, like, BRDF, right? Or implementing these different, like, memory algorithms, right?
Interesting.
I mean,
okay.
What I'm doing, right? But, I
You're
mean,
like Monday morning coffee, you know, going over like the graphical debugging and language I don't even understand.
I know I sound real cool. But you know, I do love that question because I mean, I look at my background, and I know you and we see people that end up being at the same game company their entire life, right? Mm-hmm. And it's maybe they don't know what the grass is like on the outside, right? But it's okay. I did animation at Disney, right? And then I worked at Insomniac Games, and then I worked on a yearly sports title, and now I'm at the most Imagineering creative engineering section of Disney, right? Yeah. Those are like 4 very different like life experiences.
Yeah.
You know, and it's...
And I mean, 3 years in.
Yeah, I know. And like you definitely see differences of, I mean, culture is ultimately, hey, I have this idea, let's go make it, right? Yeah. And I call that, like, that's fundamentally the Imagineering maker mindset, right? And it follows back to, we want capes. We thought of capes, right? And I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to have like a yearly sports title, it's, oh, okay, think about how long it takes to ship, how long it takes to make patch. So then how many fewer months of development do you actually have? And then within that time, if game development is in that core development phase, if you want something like capes, that needs to be accounted for. Trying to fit in capes at the last minute when you have even fewer months of game development because you're on such a yearly cycle, you're gonna see less of that.
Yeah, right? I feel like that's stuff you don't like specifically learn in a given in a role, and you're now like what you're describing seems like larger. Like you understand the overall project scope, and you're going through like, look at the practicality of my step as it relates to 8 other steps in this, and like how can we, you know, reasonably build this out for business needs, for project closure needs, and that stuff. So that is interesting. Is there an element of all this, like you're talking high level, you're talking technical, what, I guess, about your role and in this larger space of the project, what is the most exciting part for you? Like, is there a step where you're like, oh, I can't like wait till we're at this phase or this element of your job that you're like, just throw me at it?
Man, I mean, what a great question.
I try.
Right? I mean, like for me now, it's just, I guess to answer this question, it's having different roles within different companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because now I'm at like my childhood dream company, right? And it's, I am on the core tech team that produced Smuggler's Run, right?
Wow, really? Okay.
Yeah, so that is the Imagineering team I am on, right? We do use Unreal Engine, right? So I'm essentially on an Unreal Engine team,
Nice.
and it's someone thought of that ride, right? And you think about how crazy that ride is and how that came to reality and understanding the piece that rendering had, right?
Yeah.
With linking NVIDIA's custom GPUs and such. And that's the type of stuff that really, really excites me, that I'm like, oh my God, throw me in, where we make the impossible possible, right?
Yeah. You turn those imaginative, creative ideas into reality. You bridge that gap. You touch it to ground, from what I'm understanding a lot of.
Yeah, and the part that is so fun is ultimately someone had to whiteboard it and figure out some 3D math and then figure out where their little code snippet went, right? I mean,
yeah,
the vibe is much more that I have maybe my two puzzle pieces. I need to click into the puzzle, but I need to find out exactly where in this pretty much near completed puzzle they go. Which,
gotcha.
I mean, I guess that sounds easy because then you start seeing like the outline of the puzzle shape, but I promise it's not so much of that. Maybe you think of it as, you know what I mean? It's not the metaphor I'm trying to make, but
sure. I feel like there's like, not only does the piece need to fit where it is, but how does it make those connections? Like, it's not just like a spot in there. It's like, okay, all the connectors are correctly, making everything else function. Nothing broke.
Yes,
everything's operating well. Like, nothing breaking is a big thing.
So I have a phrase for that.
Okay.
In my job, I call it going down into the pixel mines.
The pixel mines, going down into the pixel. Okay.
And you gotta find as the rendering programmer, you gotta go find the shiny pixels. You drag them to the surface, and you go give to either other programmers, designers, or artists who just see this feature and it works, right? I mean, if I'm a gameplay programmer, and I'm implementing a gameplay feature, am I going to think about how lighting is working on my gameplay feature, or maybe some of those like really complex graphics intersections? I'm not. I'm just going to use what's already there. So I call it digging in the pixel mines, because I found the shiny one. I go to reach to the surface to go give it away, and they're just like, thank you very much, and they have no concept of the mine. They have no concept of how deep I went to go find it. They just got what they wanted, right? So it's like, I love to dig. I mean, if I need to go modify this one Unreal shader that is used everywhere in the engine and in the game, and I need to go modify this one, maybe these 2 or 3 variables, and then go do stuff in the vertex shader, go pass it to the pixel shader. That's so many hours of digging to find which one I needed to go like edit.
Yeah.
Right? And then I finish it, I did my digging in the pixel mine, I pass it up, but that level of digging through engine code, we're talking that I right click, I say go to function, and then suddenly there's like 20 tabs open on my Visual Studio. That's
Okay.
kind of like what I mean. Like, to me, that's really fun. I love the whiteboarding, ultimately figuring out what the core problem is, right? Because the hardest problem is, it's often not how do we solve this problem, it's how do we even identify and explain the problem in the first place, right?
Okay, the framework?
Yeah. Because
Okay,
it's school, you're told, do this intersection, right? And industry's more like, how did I know this was an intersection question?
Yeah.
How did I frame the problem? Because no one's going to hand you the problem. You have to make it into a word problem and then solve your own word problem.
Yeah, I feel like that's the biggest thing that for me, when I went from school to like actually my industry, is there's not those just, hey, insert answer here to this predetermined problem. It's what is the problem, as you're saying. And now that I know what the problem is, now I can go the easy part becomes, okay, now I know what to figure out. I didn't even know what the question was. Is that something you see? Like, I feel like you have a strong understanding of that. Do you see that as something that is a skill set many have built in like, that is like a soft skill, in so to speak, for someone in your role?
I do think it's a soft skill. I do think it's important to build it up, right? Because I mean, it's, you know, a lot of your work in this job is that you need to go talk to designers and artists, and the designers and artists, they don't understand that they are essentially handing you a word problem, right? So it's, I need to understand your need, also how you work as an artist, right? Because I don't want to go make you a tool that is too obnoxious for you to use, right? So it's, I have to truly understand your need, then formulate it as a word problem to myself. Now that I know the word problem, oh, okay, here's the solution. Now that I have the solution, then it's, how do I make this work in engine, right? Because that's like the difference between, I feel like, being a software developer and being a mathematics major is, yes, in rendering and graphics, you're going to get quite a lot of linear algebra, especially some stats, some Calc 3, right? But then knowing where that sits in software is what makes you computer science.
Gotcha. And this being one of the soft skills, are there others, like for someone aspiring to be in a position where like, I want to be the next Megan in the industry? Like, what would you encourage for them to, hey, build, like while you're doing your technical route or whatever the schoolwork you're doing, work on these skills? Is there any you would recommend they brush up on or start putting the reps into?
Oh man.
Put you in the spot right there.
I know. I mean, I do wish that I had I do wish when I was in school I had worked more with people, but it's really hard to do that in engineering, you know, of where it's, I mean, I got to fundamentally do my gameplay programming homework every single week, and your homework is individualized to you. I think if I had done the AGP program, I would have gotten more of that. Okay. You know, that's where you have the 20-person game and start implementing what designers wanted. I think
that's like a full game experience kind of simulated. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, right. I feel like that's like a real life, like what I had in my own education was, you know, I did all the technical schoolwork, but none of it really felt like I was like grasping it until I did a project akin to an AGP kind of course where, hey, we need to now do a cost analysis. You need to present this. You need to convey your thoughts to a board. You need to translate the technical to a real life, like what are the pros, cons, and like putting it to practice essentially. So that sounds like what ultimately like what that AGP course could focus at. But even if you're not in a curriculum, finding a space where you could put some of this to application seems like a potential route.
Yeah, like I really need to like make a game with friends.
Okay.
Right, because I mean, the vast majority of my schoolwork was very individualized, which I know the USC Games program accounts for. It was just, I wasn't in the Games program. I mean, my reasoning for that was I really wanted to take computer architecture and operating systems, right? Those were like, for me, those were two very fundamental computer science classes. And if you're a games major, that's not part of your curriculum, right? Instead, you're taking game design cinema classes. And I know a lot of my peers were like, why do you want to take operating systems? You know, like this is the class where you make your own page table allocator, right? And it's stuff like that, right? Those are people look forward to the fact that they get to skip the very, very hard classes. And for me, I was like, no.
You're wired different. You were like, yeah. I want to dive headfirst into that. Well, you mentioned you want to work on a game like with friends. Is there that or other aspirations that you have in your career that you're like, I want to one day be make a full game or be a game director or furthering in this career? Like what does that entail for you?
Oh man, low-key existential question, Kurosh.
Well, is there anything that you're heading towards right now, or are you just you said you found your dream job, so I'm assuming you're like just relishing those moments right now, but yeah. Are there like ideas and concepts that you want to see one day come out?
Well, Kurosh, I'm still very much on the high of that my childhood dream came true, which is I wanted to be an Imagineer, and it was...
Yeah, cheers to that.
Thank you. I mean, you have higher likelihood of going into space and experiencing zero gravity than becoming an Imagineer, and... Right? And it's like I still drive to work and start crying because I did it.
Yeah.
So I'm still on that, but I do think the indie dream is there.
Okay.
Right? And because it's like I love custom tech. I love building things from scratch, right? And it's, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the game like Tiny Glade.
Tiny Glade. I've heard of it. I've seen a little bit. Can you describe it for our viewers? Because I don't know if everyone has.
Sure. So it's this cozy simulator game where it is what is the word I am looking for? It's procedurally generated little like homes and houses and villages, and it's all aesthetically beautiful, and it is just, I mean, it is just two people that made it.
Yeah.
One guy, right? I mean, the guy was part of the fundamental EA graphics team that I saw that made a lot of the original graphics advancements, right? And I mean, the two of them made Tiny Glade, entire custom engine, all custom tech, all the procedurally generated stuff is custom, and I mean, they made it. It is a beautiful game that everyone loves. They have the most adorable YouTube series on just new features that they release every now and then. I mean, like, I think that's the dream for a lot of people.
Okay.
Especially,
is there... Oh, go ahead.
I mean, so it's you essentially had a rendering engineer and you had a very talented technical artist.
Yeah, there's I forget what the game was called. I think it was Kona. It was a bunch of ex-Pixar animators that went and were like, we want to make a game. And so seeing people jump from one industry to another, applying their strengths and their skill sets, like, that's where I'm like, I could, like, from what you've described, I could see you go in a bunch of different directions with what you want. You could be the next head of the Imagineering kind of departments, or you could go off and do your own thing. That's why I'm like, I wonder what your hopes are, what you'd like to see. But quickly, I want to touch on was, you talk about like what excites you with these custom rendering and tools and stuff. Is what about the industry right now is exciting you? Like, are there, like, you were reading, you said you wake up and you read these very technically driven, like, articles and blogs. What is it right now that you would say is like, oh, this is like, I want to see where this goes, or I see a trend or something like that? Is there anything specific that you could talk to?
Oh man, I mean, Nanite is amazing, right?
Can you what's Nanite? I'm not familiar with that.
It is how to have super high polygon geometry, but have it be at runtime not tank performance, right? So it's a high processing geometry algorithm, right? Okay. I mean, that with also stuff like mesh shaders, I mean, okay. So I'm super excited for those types of advancements. I mean, we're getting pretty close to photorealism here, right? I think we're like 95% of the way there. I mean, I guess.
And is that stuff, like, again, going to someone who's on the outside, when they hear, like, I feel like a lot of times when I'm talking to enthusiasts and peers, like on my side, they're like, oh, this is the latest advancement, which is, I don't know, the PlayStation's, PSSR, or Nintendo's X, Y, and Z technical stuff. But I feel like you're much more in the weeds of what that is, or further things that are like not seen. Like, does that same stuff excite you when you see like hardware or consoles, or do anything like that?
I get really excited about seeing people's runtime and people's performance, right? And because I mean, it's right, like path traced shadows, right? They look amazing, but I mean, that's stuff you have to bake offline most of the time, and then I don't see it in runtime in the game, right? So then when you start seeing Nanite being in games, and
but is that something that like a player would know, like, oh, this game is using Nanite, or this game is not, or is that something on the industry side?
I think Nanite you can tell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do the conversation, because I have a friend that him and I watch a lot of talks about that involve Mark Cerny, and he gets into the nitty gritty. is that stuff? Yeah. Okay. I was about to ask, like, is that? I feel like that kind of level of conversation is something you'd find very interesting and enjoyable.
Very much. So. I got to hang out with him and meet him at DICE this year, and
really
lovely individual.
Oh wow, that's so cool. Yeah, no, that's who my friend fangirls over. But like in that, you mentioned a little bit about like 30 frames or 60 frames per second. Is that stuff that you're like, I want to see more? Are you in those conversations of like quality versus performance modes and
Very
like
much
what?
so.
Okay.
Yeah, very, very much so. Of like, hey, I know you did all these custom shaders, right, in Unreal, but it's if I have to spend 45 minutes compiling your game before I can even start, I mean, then I start having questions about how you wrote your shaders, right? Because I think we're all starting to get used to that games are like that now.
Yeah.
And not all games are, right? That is a choice that was made.
Yeah. Do you hope that there's one day a point where it's no longer two modes and it's like we can get to something that operates at the higher fidelity but also looks, is operating at the highest visual, and frame rate and everything? Do you think that's in the near future?
I do think there's a lot of editor features that don't necessarily need to go anywhere near runtime, right? Okay. So it's fundamentally we do have to keep the two separate, and it's important we keep the two separate so then it's easier to performance gauge between the two, right? Like if I'm profiling editor versus profiling runtime, right? Runtime should not need to know about a lot of the different editor tools, right? Like we're talking about, like the manipulator tools to like move stuff around, and then here you have another system that's then maybe has an event system that's like listening, right? Because like Unreal has an event system that's like listening to see if you move the manipulator. But then you have stuff like that where like runtime doesn't need to know about that because now you're wasting CPU time, which then you don't want to waste CPU time, right? It's usually that the GPU is waiting on the CPU. So then the quicker your CPU is, the more frames you're going to be able to process.
Okay.
The more stuff you can do in a single frame as well.
Yeah.
So we want runtime to look the best. We don't want to have to spend an hour compiling shaders at the start, right? So then you start talking about different ways you can write your shaders, but then we also want to have a difference between, okay, we have these very, very separate engine features, and we have these very separate, like, oh, okay, this is what runtime needs to do. So they do need to be separate, but I still want runtime to look amazing. And I still want to empower the artist to make whatever they want and not have to horribly worry about PSOs. But if they do know about PSOs, that does make my life easier. So
it's like a push and pull of like, I want you to be mindful, but like still do your thing kind of thing.
Yeah, which I do feel our talk at Comic-Con largely talked about this, so it was a wonderful topic to give a talk on. Yeah,
thank you. And something I want to kind of, as we get closer to the end of this is, do you still, like, I know you're in the weeds of a lot of this stuff and you're working all the time in all these spaces and it's a joy to you. Do you still find time to look at it from a player's side? Like, do you get a chance to play games for fun? And do you look at it differently now that you're like, oh, I see this and that? Like, you mentioned a little bit with Tiny Glade, a little bit of that.
I do both. I'm more so now looking at, like, the runtime and the features, right? I mean, I wish I played more games, and so I still, at the core, look for, did I have fun or not? Mm-hmm. Right? And then after I get past that, what I call like that level 1, level 2 is I start to notice how much like the game is stuttering, because then I'm like, loading in a PSO, look at that stutter, and I'm like, oh god, or for me it's also like textures popping, if like where the LOD transition is very not smooth.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm like, man, at least the frame rate didn't tank, but I mean, it's like, do I want to spend a Saturday playing Repo with the boys? Yes. Instant, always, Yeah. Do I look forward to, do I always like watching the Nintendo Direct? Yes.
Okay. So you're still very much, there's a fan inside you that still is there, as much as you're in the industry. Like, I know you said, like, you went to GDC and you went to DICE. Like, those experiences, like, did that shift, or did that open you up or present some new perspectives to you in any way?
I mean, I think it's just, for me, realizing that these people are my peers now, which, that's weird. I don't feel cool enough for that,
You should not have imposter syndrome. You should not have it.
I always will, and So, I mean, I'm still, yeah, so I still have a lot of imposter syndrome. I guess that's how it's changing for me too now, you know, of where, right, I mean, I'll play these games and I can remember the person, you know, like you're talking about Mark Cerny and I'm like, oh, Mark Cerny is my friend.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that, yeah, that is very crazy.
when you vocalize it, you're like, that's a reality now. And I feel like very much in the same way that you work, you're like things, you make things a reality. So that's like part of your, who, you know, what you do.
Yeah.
I wanted to end things with some lighter tone questions, or more fun questions, so to speak. What is a game that, like, oftentimes with my guests that aren't in the industry, I ask the prompt of the interview is, what is a game that means a lot to you? So in that vein, I want to briefly get a chance to ask you, what is a game that means a lot to you?
It is actually Rollercoaster Tycoon 3.
3? Okay. Really? Okay. Can you briefly say why that one
sure,
holds such a special place for you?
From the ages of, like, for me, like 9 to 15, I played so much of that game, and for me, it's this open world sandbox game where you're making a theme park or a water park or a zoo, and it means so much to me because it's like I would just sit for hours looking at the developer community and seeing all the lands that people thought of, you know, or I mean, you're a kid and you go to Disneyland, you come home and you try to recreate pirates on your computer, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, you're fundamentally, you're using these tools that designers had to think of, that tools programmers went and implemented, and then as a kid, you're like, man, this tool sucks. When I need to go build stuff underground, it doesn't work, you know? And then, and then like, you go to make graphics tooling for a living, and you're like, nah, I'm gonna make it so they can put stuff underground. You know what I mean? And it's you start framing it from those types of experiences, because I mean, for me, I think about those where I was fundamentally, right, an end user. I was a product user of all these art tools, and then you start having your own opinions and which ones you love and which ones you don't love and why, and then, you know, flying around the game and just seeing of, like, that game is crazy because it is under 2 gigabytes.
Yeah.
And the amount that is in that game, and you're like, what is in these 2 gigabytes? And then you start looking and it's mainly textures, right? So then that means that was such well-written portable code, right? And I feel like there's a whole story mode. There's so many tools that you get to use in the game. So then and it's under 2 gigabytes. I mean, I only recently learned when I actually replayed it recently in the last month, because I'm an Imagineer now, and this was one of the things that inspired me to do that. And
yeah.
Now I look at it as an engineering standpoint, because I always looked at it as, I love this game. I only know from a game standpoint, is because I hadn't studied games yet. And now I'm like, this is fire. You know?
Yeah.
Right? This game has held up so well. There's so much. It's under 2 gigs. This is crazy.
You're looking at it with new, yeah. I when you were describing, like, there's no way she was thinking these fascinations back when she was a young kid about the textures and everything. But so it's like you enjoyed it at that time as a player, and now you're looking back at it with some appreciation from your work and everything. That's wild. So, you mentioned Repo. Are you playing any games these days? What's a game what's one of the latest games you've been playing?
I fundamentally love Team Fortress 2, actually. I would like to plug that here.
Yeah?
I have always loved TF2. It is just silly, goofy. I get to go on and have a great time.
I loved with that game, one of my favorite things I was just sharing with a friend who didn't see these was they always had the meet the demo man, meet the heavy, those little vignettes of each of the characters. Yes. Which of the characters do you enjoy playing the most?
Oh, Sniper.
Okay.
Yeah. I love to be obnoxious, and I'm at the point where I can quickly snipe, you know, and then you start, like, memorizing the maps, you know, and so, I mean, that's the stuff I love, you know, and now that I'm an adult, right, I mean, I don't know if you remember the payload map Badlands Basin.
Yes.
That's what it's called? Okay,
I played that map many times.
That is a real place. That is in Death Valley National Park, and you can go there. And
really?
I went there last February when, like, part of, like, the basin turned into a lake and you could, like, swim in it. It was really weird, but I saw like Badlands Basin and I didn't know that, and I was like, right before I go to bed, I try to scroll on Wikipedia instead of doom scroll, you know.
Oh,
And
okay.
I was
That's
reading
pretty
about.
healthy.
Thank you. I am trying. I was reading about like different national parks, and then there's a section on the Death Valley one that about Team Fortress 2, and I was like, dude, no way. So then I went and I like took pictures, and I was like comparing to the game, and I was like, this is crazy.
You're like, that's a spawn point. That's a spawn point right there.
Literally, I was like, that's one of the payload checkpoints.
I did not know that was a real place. That blows my mind. And I think I need to take your idea of potentially doing Wikipedia scrolls instead of doom scrolling into the wee hours of the night.
Oh, dude, I know. You start reading about just, I don't know. I mean, I remember I read about like the entire history of both like Fiji, Tahiti. I read about so many different types of like fungi and bacteria. Like, it's just highly recommend. You know?
Yeah, that's a good note.
The depth of the Wikipedia page.
It's a fountain of knowledge, and I think we need to make sure we encourage things like that. But I want to ask one last question. This being Savepoint Stories, if you were to leave a save point or message for those that want to follow in your footsteps, or those that are also figuring out this kind of stuff, what would you like to leave as a save point for those people?
Remember and do not give up on your dreams.
That's a beautiful. I fully cannot disagree. I fully support that kind of message. I think that's a great point. And seeing you reaching some of your goals so early in your career is like something that is so exciting to see. You don't often, myself, and I know many others, it's a constant struggle. There's always things that come into place. So Megan, thank you again for sharing everything you've shared. It's exciting to see your career, and thank you again for spending some time with me again, talking about what you do and what the industry looks like. I think that's something that I want to break the barrier of more of, like, people need to see what it looks like or sounds like and hear about what's going on your end of things and normalizing that. So thank you again. Is there anything you want to share or a plug or anything like that, or shout out before we wrap up?
Oh, I mean, like, if you ever have any questions, right? I mean, like, just DM me on LinkedIn. You know, I am the only Megan Friedenberg that exists.
That's an awesome thing to claim.
Ooh, I know. I guess I'm only social on Instagram. Your.megatron is my Instagram. I will also respond there.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, don't let your dreams be dreams, you know. And I hope that people listening to this podcast with aspirations of entering into the creative industry, there's really no one straight shot way. I mean, it's always a choose your own adventure. I mean, it was challenging to get here, right? But at the end of the day, there is nothing more satisfying than seeing your dreams come true, right?
That's amazing advice. I hope our viewers get a chance to listen to this and enjoy this episode so much. So I'll make sure to plug your LinkedIn in the show notes. Thank you again, Megan, for joining us, and thank you, viewers, for listening on another episode of Savepoint Stories. We'll catch you on the next Savepoint.
Thanks, Kurosh. Bye, everyone.